Omnibus, and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Mark and the Millennials. We're calling it Omnibus. Not a very exciting title, but it would be if you actually knew what it meant. Omnibus, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is a volume containing several novels or other previously published items that were published separately. So think about that. You had a bunch of things that were published independently, and then you put them all together in one like big group, one volume, and now it is an omnibus. Well, that's what the United States Senate did, ladies and gentlemen. The United States Senate decided to put together an omnibus spending bill. Now, keep in mind, it's a bill that doesn't just include spending. It includes changes in laws and who knows what, because it's 4,100 pages long. Think about that. It's 4,100 pages long. So it's an omnibus bill in Congress that is so egregious. Would you even have time to read it if you're an elected official? And the answer is no. I mean, would even your staff, you would need like a staff of 50 people to be able to go through this bill in a timely manner to really understand what's in it. And that's not even the only thing. Chucky Schumer, the senator from New York State, is giving senators only 24 hours to read the bill. And the argument, of course, is, well, we've been working on this bill for months. It's like, no, I kind of doubt that. I really kind of doubt that. Because the way it works in Washington, and it's the same way it works in most state capitals, namely that the majority party writes the bills. And the majority party can play hide the ball for as long as it wants to, and then just dump this massive omnibus bill on all of the members, Republican and Democrat alike, and then say, you got 24 hours, and we're going to vote on this bill. This is the best way I can think of to run a country into the ground. And so we have a couple of clips concerning this particular omnibus 4,100-page Senate bill. The first one is of Chucky Schumer, and a reporter actually asks Schumer about the volume of this bill and what's in it, and whether the members have really even had an opportunity to read it, and is this like the right way to do business in Washington or for any government or for any business for that matter. We have that clip, and here it is.
How is it in a functional process to drop a 4,100-page bill this morning, expect to vote on it tomorrow? Well, most of Congress hasn't had a chance to review this.
Look, the bill has been carefully worked on by the Appropriations Committee for a very, very long time. Most of the provisions of the bill were well known weeks and weeks and weeks in advance. And getting this bill done for the American people, which really matters, is the most important thing.
Getting this bill done for the American people is really what matters. It is a bill that I can tell you right now, if you were to ask any member of Congress what is in the bill, they couldn't tell you. They could maybe give you one or two or three highlights, but they're not going to really be able to tell you what's in the bill. Specifically, it's 4,100 pages long. So in the Daily Caller, how is it functional? A reporter grills Schumer on a 4,000-plus page bill set to be passed without even enough time to read it. Well, you just heard Schumer there. So that reporter grilled Senate Majority Leader Chucky Schumer Tuesday over the omnibus spending bill released Tuesday morning, in other words, yesterday. The proposed government funding bill comes in at a $1.66 trillion price tag and includes money for non-governmental organizations. In other words, organizations that aren't part of the government. In other words, Democrats buying off non-governmental organizations like nonprofits and other types of organizations that might work with government but aren't actually controlled by government. That's how Democrats keep growing government. That money sheltering transportation and transporting and feeding migrants, as well as money for the Ukraine, and millions to renovate a Planned Parenthood clinic. Those are the Democrat spending priorities. The legislation is 4,155 pages long, and the Senate is expected to vote on it any day now. One reporter asked Schumer, how is it functional to require legislators to read a bill that big in such a short period of time? You just heard that clip. And of course, Chucky Schumer was like, well, we've been working on this for a long, long time, which is a lie, of course. And it also, ladies and gentlemen, misses the point. How can you judge your United States senator on their voting record, which is what you should judge them on when you are voting for them in office or against them when they run for election? How can you judge who they really are if they're voting for a 4,100-page long omnibus bill? You can't, because you don't even know what's in the daggone bill. They don't know either. So, of course, you heard Chucky Schumer say the bill's been carefully worked on by the Appropriations Committee for a very long time. Most of the provisions are very well known weeks and weeks in advance. He said most of the provisions. I'm sure that's not true. And so Republican Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, one of the few fiscal conservatives in the United States Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate for that matter, took aim at the large bill and the lack of time reading it. And he had tweeted, I wonder how long it will take the clerk to read this bill. Remember, the clerk has to actually read the bill over the Senate floor, because you got to read the bill before you actually, vote on it. He'll be the only person to have really read it. Members of Congress will not have read it, nor will they actually have any idea what's in it, as I've already stated. And so there's a picture of Rand Paul in the tweet, and he has this tray on wheels, it's like a big food tray kind of thing, and that you would cart through the halls of Congress to transport things, since it has wheels. And on top of it is this massive bill, and he's got his fist on top of the bill because it's so huge. And when you look at this, you immediately, your first reaction is, no individual is actually going to read this bill. And I'm sure that, a Democrat would say, oh, of course not, because they'll just ask their staff what's in it. Come on. It's ridiculous. This is not a way to do business. So good old Rand Paul says, it's an abomination. It's no good, rotten way to run government. We're standing up and saying no to this $1.7 trillion spending bill. Ladies and gentlemen, we have this clip from Rand Paul about this omnibus spending bill, and here it is.
I brought with me the Omni, 4,155 pages. When was it produced? In the dead of the night, 1:30 in the morning when it was released. Now, people argue that it's conservatives' fault. You don't have the Christmas spirit. Somehow you're holding up government. Well, whose job is it to produce this? The people in charge of spending, the people in charge of both of the parties. When did they know that this would be necessary? Well, it's in the law, September 30th. You got 9 months, almost 10 months, to produce a plan, to have a spending plan. They weren't ready on September 30th, so they voted themselves 90 more days. They weren't ready last week either, so they voted themselves another week. And now we have it at 1:30 in the morning this morning. But what's the clamor? The clamor is to vote. Vote now. Let's get it done. Why are you standing in the way of spending? Well, the real question is this. What is more dangerous? What is more dangerous to the country? $1.1 trillion in new debt, or as Republican leadership likes to say, oh, but it's a win. It's a big win. We're getting $45 billion for the military. So which is more important? Which threatens the country more? Are we at risk for being invaded by a foreign power if we don't put $45 billion into the military? Or are we more at risk by adding to a $31 trillion debt? I think the greatest risk to our national security is our debt. The process stinks.
That is exactly right, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why people like Rand Paul are so necessary to remain in government and to get more people like him in government, because he knows that the country is operating in a post-constitutional period whereby you have omnibus spending bills that are 4,100 plus pages long that no one has an opportunity to know what's inside of it. And the idea is, well, there are good things and there are bad things. Well, that doesn't tell the American people anything. The American people should have the right to watch you vote on each line item as a separate piece of legislation. So, for example, why not publish each item separately? So, in other words, it would be the opposite of an omnibus bill. It would be a bill that actually would then become maybe 1,000 bills, potentially, because it probably already is 1,000 bills. And then each individual bill would have to be voted on independently by each member of Congress. Do you think even half that spending would pass if that's the way they actually voted in Congress? The answer is no. No, of course it wouldn't. Because now they have to defend each vote unto itself when they cast it. And so you've heard, I had to bring this up today because even though the last podcast we talked about the Convention of States organization and an Article 5 Convention of States and why that's so important now in America, now more than ever, what's happened since that last podcast, which I was not expecting, was a 4,100 page bill, omnibus bill in the United States Senate that was drafted, giving the members 24 hours to decide whether they're going to vote for it or against it, as if they would even have enough time to read it in 24 hours, which they wouldn't. And so an honest government, a government that would truly be limited in scope and size, would be one in which you would have each bill published separately and you'd have an up or down vote on each one of those bills, because each of those bills would be understandable, not just to the people voting for the bill, but for the American people to follow the bills themselves. And I can assure you, when there's an up or down vote on each individual bill, many would not pass. That is to say, many would not pass with Republican votes, and many would not pass with Democrat votes. And of course, you talk to the legislators and they're like, oh, but that's necessary because it's compromise involved in an omnibus bill. Nonsense. Government is so it's just so powerful. It's so all powerful right now, our federal government. It is way too big. It is way out of control, as we've seen ad nauseum with the security state and Twitter, as well as the other social media platforms. And we wonder why. And it's because this is what government has morphed into. One that basically says, it's just 1.7 trillion of new spending. Let's just put it all in a 4,100 page bill and we'll all get it through and we'll say it's a win because the military got a bunch of money. Look, ladies and gentlemen, it matters where the money's being spent, not how much money they got. So let's say in this bill, as Rand Paul says, the military got $45 billion or will get $45 billion. I would like to know where the heck the $45 billion is being spent. Is it being spent in Ukraine? Is it being spent in other countries for munitions and so forth? What's it being spent? Is it useful spending? Is it really helping us? We don't know because it's just one big number. Publish the items separately. And the only way that's ever going to happen, the only way we are ever going to have a country and get our country back is if there is indeed an Article 5 Convention of States and the 4,100 page Senate bill then becomes 1,000 individual bills that are voted on up or down by the United States Senate. And so that you and I can actually understand what is actually happening in our government and what the spending is actually going to do on a bill-by-bill basis. So yes, we did talk about this last podcast, and then no sooner did we talk about it, then Congress just goes ahead and does the worst possible thing they can, which is to spend a lot of money in a massive bill. And so look, Ronald Reagan, who in my opinion was truly the last great president, Democrat or Republican in the United States of America, said famously, and he said it in many different ways, he says, "Man is not free unless government is limited." And boy, is that true. Because when you have bills like this and you have the volume of spending, ladies and gentlemen, that's your federal government crowding out your individual liberty. That's what that sounds like to me. And it stops you from having, you and all of us, we the people, it stops us from having an actual role in the process of legislating. Yes, we elect people to legislate, but we don't even have a role in that anymore because we don't even know what questions to ask because we don't even know what's in the bill. Do you out there in podcast land have time to read this 4,100 page Senate bill? No. Chris, would you ever read a page, like if there was something in that bill that you thought was really egregious and then you wanted to find it, and then you're like, well, I'm just going to read the whole bill now because I'm sure there are lots of bad things. I mean, how would you have time? How would you have time? And how would you even reference it? Versus it being an individual bill and you writing your United States congressman an email or calling up the office and saying, hey, House Bill 111, I don't want you to vote for because I don't want more money to go to the Ukraine, as an example. And then you can at least have that conversation because it's a single piece of legislation. That's what we're asking for. And I do know that the good people at the Convention of States organization is trying to do just that. And I sure hope that you sign up sooner rather than later for COS.com because that is a great organization. COSaction, yes.com. We'll look that up. I know we should know it by heart now. But Convention of States, look it up. It's an Article 5 of the Convention of States, and we need you to sign up as soon as you can. And no, this is not a paid advertisement. This is just me realizing that
conventionofstates.com.
Conventionofstates.com. I'm sure if you looked up COS, the same thing would come up, but you never know with Google. They probably would send you to some other like porn site or something because they're so crooked over there. But I hope that we can get this through enough states so that we can push back and limit our government once and for all. And I got to tell you, the security state in particular, that would be another place to do it. Do it meaning limit government. And we know this because we see what's been happening in Twitter. We see all these different Twitter files being released by Elon Musk's Twitter 2.0. And ladies and gentlemen, the latest is this new syndrome called EDS. Do you have EDS? No, it's not erectile dysfunction. It is Elon derangement syndrome. So in the Daily Caller, EDS is the newest epidemic ripping through liberals. Liberal journalists and politicians are suffering from intense Elon derangement syndrome, otherwise known as EDS, as Elon Musk becomes their top adversary. Similar to Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS, which caused former President Donald Trump to suffer years of baseless accusations and investigations, including 2 failed presidential impeachments, Musk, get this, ladies and gentlemen, Musk is facing federal government probes and media hit pieces hoping to take him down. EDS hit liberals hard after he purchased Twitter. Before his takeover, Twitter was pegged with progressive ideology and draconian moderation practices that hurt mainly conservatives. Liberal journalists relied on Twitter as one of their most effective tools for disseminating their perspectives, or propaganda, as I would say. Their machine was now in the hands of Musk, who openly mocks the liberal agenda and has called for defeating the woke mind virus. So Elon Musk, for example, on December 12th, tweeted out, "The woke mind virus is either defeated or nothing else matters." When company ownership was transferred to Musk, the calls for federal investigations began. With Musk, imagine that. All you did was buy a company. And then suddenly there are calls, we must investigate the guy buying the company. With Musk's detractors citing an accusation familiar to conservatives, foreign influence. Democrat Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, one of the dumbest members of the Senate, by the way, published an open letter on October 31st to the U.S. Treasury Department calling for an examination into the billionaire's connection to Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. Murphy urged the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, to explore a potential national security concern arising from the Saudi princes committing $1.89 billion to help finance Musk's $44 billion Twitter deal. CFIUS must also review non-controlling investments in certain sensitive U.S. businesses as well, including companies that develop critical technologies and businesses that possess sensitive personal data on U.S. citizens, demanded Murphy. The purpose of these reviews is clear: to protect the national security interests of the United States and the American citizens. So that's a United States senator saying that Elon Musk is a dangerous man to own Twitter because he has investors who are not the majority investors, not even close. You know, they own a really small piece of it. Clearly, Elon Musk is the driving force and the majority owner, and the guy who's technically running the company, even though he's going to put new people in charge, Elon will still be in charge. We all know that. And they're saying that the current Twitter 2.0 is more dangerous than the Twitter 1.0, which was censoring Americans and shadow banning Americans. Federal and state government officials rely on Twitter to be a reliable medium to communicate vital information to the public, said Murphy. Did he ever say that before? Of course not. MSNBC radio host and lawyer Dean Obadiah responded to a Musk tweet on October 31st, the same day as Murphy's CFIUS review request, vowing to investigate Musk's immigration paperwork. Think about that. Elon Musk, ladies and gentlemen, is an immigrant to the United States. He was born in South Africa. And so this gentleman at MSNBC, he's a lawyer and a host there, of course, Dean Obadiah, says that he's going to look at Elon Musk's immigration paperwork to make sure there are no lies or omissions that could get him deported, meaning they want to get him deported. Perhaps the greatest engineer in 100 years, Elon Musk, and they don't want him here. Can you imagine? I mean, you don't want the guy here that is inventing incredible technologies and it's probably only halfway through his useful lifespan of inventing new technologies. And so John Levine said reporters covering Elon Musk being nuked, Donnie O'Sullivan, and they're going down the list of different reporters that Elon Musk wanted to get off of Twitter simply because of the fact that they were outing where he was flying to. And they have, for the most part, been reinstated. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we're reading this today because of the simple fact that Trump derangement syndrome and EDS, Elon derangement syndrome, are exactly the same, which is you can be the most wonderful person in the world. You could be the most innovative, most important person in technological history, or perhaps the most important technological figure of the 21st century so far. That would be Elon Musk. I think that's true. Certainly the most important figure in the 21st century. And yet, because he doesn't subscribe to the far left ideology they want him gone. They want him deported. I mean, it's just, these people are crazy. They're so dangerous. And you have to say to yourself, thank God there are people who are this powerful like Elon Musk, powerful because of the money that they have, as well as their intellect, to be able to argue against these crooked left-wing liberals, because it's Elon against the entire left-wing establishment at this particular point in time. So meantime, Twitter users vote for Elon Musk to step down as CEO. So Elon did an online poll at Twitter asking everyone, should I step down as Twitter CEO or not? And apparently 57.5% of the voters said, yeah, Elon, we want you to step down. And 42% wanted him to stay. So Elon's like, okay, fine, I'll step down, you know? And obviously what he's going to do is he's going to put a management team in place that implements his wishes, as he should, because he owns Twitter. And part of those wishes is he wants them to make money. And he also wants it to be a platform that is open and free and respects the First Amendment. That's important, needless to say, for all of us Americans. And no sooner did that happen, and I almost thought it wasn't real, by the way. When you saw this being put up on Twitter, wasn't your first reaction, Chris, like, is he really doing this? Is he really asking us to vote for him to stay or to go? Yeah, and it's like,
I kind of thought he was trolling people, but
I didn't think it was real, but it is apparently. Why is it kind of real and kind of not real? I'll tell you what my real opinion of this is. I think Elon realizes that he has so many responsibilities with Tesla and SpaceX and the Boring Company and who knows what else that he's inventing, that company where he has the brain chip, the robotics company.
Yeah, Neuralink or whatever.
Neuralink, and then, building robots and so forth. I think that he realizes he doesn't want the investors in these other companies to think that he is somehow not spending sufficient time on those companies. Makes perfect sense. So he's like, I'll just put a management team in place after I've been voted out as CEO by the Twitter, the ultimate in democracy, right? The voters vote you out. And I couldn't tell, by the way, whether you could vote multiple times. I mean, could you?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not really sure either, because when you voted on Twitter, it appeared like you could vote a second time or a third time. So I'm not really sure if they had some sort of protective system in place. Nonetheless, the Babylon Bee came out yesterday and said this: Elon to stay at Twitter as its CEO after counting mail-in ballots. So after they counted the mail-in ballots, which of course is a joke, Elon Musk is going to stay at Twitter. And this is important. This is so important, ladies and gentlemen, that we have at least one free speech platform. And I just want the listeners of this podcast to know that nothing's going to change radically after Elon Musk officially leaves as CEO, because he's clearly going to put checks and balances in place. And he has, I'm sure, a stellar management team that he's been putting in place behind the scenes while trolling so many different reporters and as well as others. And that's really important. It's really important. And I'm so thankful, and we should all be thankful, that this is, to me, like a great Christmas present that underscores how we could be saved by this free speech platform. And by saved, I mean, look, Christopher Hopkins and I, before we started the podcast, were talking about how you can speak as an elected official about an egregious bill that's in Congress or in your own state house, and no one reports on it. It's like it didn't even happen. And now we at least have one platform where you can put the information out there, and you're not going to be algorithmed out. You're not going to be shadow banned. People can actually see it. They can actually see the bill that you're referring to because you can link to the actual bill. Whereas when we tried to do that before, nobody saw it. I mean, nobody whatsoever. And I know that you're probably thinking the same thing. And obviously we have a long way to go. We need a lot more. We need a lot more free speech platforms. There's no doubt about that. But at least we have one high-tech free speech platform. And thank you, Elon Musk, for making that happen. So next up, podcast listeners, we have this incredible story about BlackRock. So BlackRock and Vanguard. So these are two large funds. You can buy all kinds of mutual funds, as well as have these two companies, BlackRock and Vanguard, two different companies, manage your money for you. Now, it used to be that wasn't an issue because you would have someone manage your money and they would invest your money in a way that gave you the best return on your money. Because that's the whole idea, right? You want your money to make money so that you're ready and you can live a better life as time goes on and then throughout retirement. But there's this new trend with these firms, BlackRock and Vanguard, because they are so huge that state attorney generals have sounded the alarm about BlackRock and Vanguard buying large stakes in utilities. Think about this. So Berkshire Hathaway vice chairman says he doesn't want Larry Fink to be my emperor. Now think about this. The acquisition by investment managers BlackRock and Vanguard of ever-increasing shares in America's public utility companies, these are the companies that produce and provide and deliver electricity to your house and to your business, okay? BlackRock and Vanguard are buying shares of these utilities. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're trying to buy enough shares to get a controlling interest or a big say in those utilities. And it's setting off alarm bells from conservatives and progressives alike. In April, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, approved a request from BlackRock to increase its ownership to 20% of a public utility's voting shares without being deemed an affiliate and incurring the regulatory scrutiny and disclosures that come with that. To gain FERC approval, BlackRock and Vanguard promised they'd be passive investors and not use their shares to influence the management. Because utilities are monopolies, most of the time, because they are, and they're monopolies in the regions that they serve, and because electricity and heating are essential in your life, any investment of more than $10 million in a public utility must be approved by FERC for good reason. According to the Federal Power Act, FPA, that's the law that made that a requirement. BlackRock and Vanguard received blanket approval in 2019 to surpass this limit for 3 years. And BlackRock was just given blanket approval for another 3 years. Now Vanguard is seeking FERC approval on similar terms, but its request is sparking protests. So in November, and this is really the meat of the story, state attorneys general petitioned FERC to deny Vanguard's request, claiming that residents of their states could be harmed if the utilities are compelled to stop using fossil fuels. So there you go. So Vanguard, okay, and BlackRock want to take large stakes in your electric company, you know, the company that sends you the electric bill, so that they can force the electric company, as a result of owning a lot of their stock, to stop using fossil fuels and use only wind and solar. The attorneys general argue that Vanguard is not entitled to a blanket authorization to acquire substantial equity and voting power in utility companies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is important because when you flip the switch in your house to turn the lights on, you expect the lights to turn on. And the lights turn on because you have baseload power that's being produced by primarily fossil fuels, but also nuclear. So fossil fuels like natural gas, oil, and then also it's being produced, your electricity, by nuclear power. And what BlackRock wants to do is to say to the utilities, you can't buy that kind of power anymore. You can only buy wind and solar, in which case when you go to your house and you flip on that switch, it may very well not turn on. And so that's why these laws are in place at the federal level. Namely, that large funds like Vanguard, which by the way is using your money that you're investing in Wall Street or in one of their funds, and BlackRock, same thing, using your money to actually work against you. Because, ladies and gentlemen, wind and solar is going to cost more on your electric bill, but they don't care. Because these same funds, I'm sure, have investments in what? Wind and solar. So imagine that. You have someone that controls your electricity, and they're using your money that you've invested in Wall Street to increase the price of your electricity. And this is common with BlackRock and Vanguard. And so, interestingly enough, I'll get various solicitations from companies that want to manage money and all that stuff. And oftentimes they're like, yeah, well, some of the best funds are Vanguard and BlackRock. And I intentionally will not buy any of that stuff or invest in any of those things, because these companies aren't interested in return on investment to their investors. They're interested in basically changing and controlling every aspect of your life and using your money to do it. So Charlie Munger of Berkshire Hathaway, the company chaired by renowned investor Warren Buffett, it's Warren Buffett's partner, concurred, stating in February that we have a new bunch of emperors, BlackRock and Vanguard he's talking about, and they're the people who vote the shares in the index funds. I think the world of BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, but I'm not sure I want him to be my emperor. And so that's really, you have to understand, these two gentlemen are very Midwest, genteel types. And for them to go after Larry Fink at BlackRock, that's a big deal. That's a big deal because Munger and, of course, Warren Buffett, these two individuals, they're about making money. And they routinely buy these large types of businesses, electricity generators, as well as utilities and other types of businesses that they will invest in for the purpose of returning income to their investors, making money for their investors. Now, you might think to yourself, well, Mark, why does this matter? I mean, who cares about who owns the utilities and who cares how much they own and so forth? Well, guess what? What if Vanguard and BlackRock decided to buy a majority of the shares in all of the grocery stores in America? You might say, oh, they couldn't do that. These funds are so huge, they probably could. I mean, people invest in these funds all the time. So what if they did that? And once they did that, you walked into your grocery store and you realized, well, I can no longer buy chicken. I can no longer buy turkey. I can't buy beef. I can't buy pork. All I have are plant-based foods. And then you go to the next, well, this is terrible. This is not, my grocery store is fundamentally changed. Since when did this happen? So then you go to the next grocery store, completely different one. Same thing happens there. And then in other words, your choices are now limited because these companies are engaging in a political statement using your money to do it and limiting your freedom of choice. That's exactly what they're doing with electricity. That's exactly what their intent is. They're saying, we know these other types of generation of electricity are less safe and less reliable. It's a better way of putting it. They're less reliable, like wind and solar. They're not baseload energy because they don't work all of the time. Wind doesn't always blow, sun doesn't always shine. But we're going to force this upon you, and you're going to have less reliable electricity moving into the future because this is the kind of world that we want you to live in. You ought not have the choice. This is important stuff. And this is a trend that's happening in America. And what's ironic, that is, we're the ones who are paying for this. using our money, investing in these two funds, and then they're using it against us. So please don't invest in those two funds, BlackRock and Vanguard, because they do not mean you well. And these are folks that are trying to affect policy in the United States of America without going through Congress or through state legislatures. And that really is what's happening here. They aren't innovators. It's the opposite. They're part of the cancel culture. You can no longer eat these things. You can no longer grow these kinds of foods. You can no longer raise cows. You can no longer buy this kind of electricity. That is not the function of the private sector. The function of the private sector is to give you as many choices as possible, and then you get to choose. And if there's a policy decision by Congress or by the states, then those policy decisions are debated versus policy decisions being decided by a business that's so all-powerful that you don't have a choice of opting out. Pretty important stuff. And it's something that I think we should all continue to watch as closely as possible. So next up, podcast listeners, California stops the exodus. So get this. You're going to love this. You know how California has lost one or two congressmen after the redistricting and the reapportionment in the United States of the population because California is actually losing population for the first time in its history? Well, they are losing population because of the bad policies and because of the way the place is being run. It's being run into the ground, of course, by the California legislature and, of course, by Gavin Newsom. But California has found a way to stop the exodus. Now they're going to have lots of people moving back into California. You want to know why? Because California is going to pay you reparations. Why wouldn't you move back then? Or why wouldn't you move there for the first time? So what is this? This is The Blaze. Yeah, it's theblaze.com. And by the way, it's also in the San Francisco Chronicle. It's in papers across America. We're pulling it out of here because those other papers, of course, are trying to give you the woke definition of what they're trying to do. We just want to give you the facts. Activists demands California dole out at least $830,000 per person in racial reparations.
Is it for all those Californian slave owners?
That's right, for all the Californians, the people that were previous slaves in California, because it was not a slave state, by the way. Quote, comply or it's going to be a serious backlash, is what one of these folks said. Now, remember, people are in front of this committee and they're testifying and so forth, saying, yeah, I want my money. You know, there's this commercial on TV, at least in the greater Washington, D.C. area called J.G. Wentworth's. And they'll cash your check for you, but they'll charge you like an outrageous fee. So they're like usurers, basically. And it's like, I want my money now. And that's what this looks like. It is so gross to watch. So you have people literally saying what I just said. And don't go posting, oh, you said something and it was wrong or it was discriminatory. No such thing. That's literally what these people are saying. These people meaning whoever has the guts to go in front of this group saying, you owe me money. So the California Reparations Task Force recently claimed that the state's black residents whose ancestors were in the U.S. from 1933 to 1977 are owed over $500 billion in reparations for housing discrimination. Some activists are now saying that that's not even enough. So, look, ladies and gentlemen, we could talk about this issue forever, this issue of reparations that the Democrats have brought up. Why do you think the Democrats have brought this up? So I have a different perspective on this. They brought it up to, of course, distract everybody, naturally. That's a given. But they've also brought up the issue of reparations in California and in other states. And I won't be surprised in my state of Maryland if the legislature doesn't try to take that up as well in the 2023 session for a variety of reasons, which I'll describe in a little while. But in California, they're already taking up the issue of reparations because they have a task force to talk about it and discuss it. And the task force will, of course, make recommendations to the legislature and to the governor about how to pay people off for more Democrat votes, which is really what this is about. We live in a period of time in American history when there are greater opportunities for people, no matter how you look, than ever before, than any other country on this planet. Knowing this, more and more Black voters are voting Republican. More and more Hispanic voters are voting Republican. And that's because as more individuals move into the middle class and excel and see that there are possibilities to have an even better and better life, and that life is not dependent upon how they look, because we live in a colorblind society, that is a good thing. That's aspirational. That is what the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln and Reagan, are all about. The Democrats are so incredibly cynical that they realize that they can only hold on to the Black population as a voting bloc if they pay them off. And they try to show that it is the Republicans who don't want to pay people off for votes. And you want to know something? I'm happy to say that. I don't believe in paying people off for votes. It's wrong. But California, which has had this exodus for quite some time, exodus, by the way, of people of all color, it doesn't really matter because of the way the state is run. As we started out this podcast, or this segment of the podcast, those individuals will never be back, but there will be plenty of other people that live in Chicago and I'm sure Maryland, maybe Connecticut, New York, wherever, that are going to move to California for this check. For this check. Do you see that this is the problem, ladies and gentlemen? Remember, Gavin Newsom had stimulus checks to the citizens of California right before his recall election. So he paid people off right before his election so that he would get reelected in a recall election, which he was reelected. And now, of course, California is not satisfied with being an overwhelmingly Democrat state with very few alternative voices. And if you do have an alternative voice in California, you know it's completely stamped out in the legislature and elsewhere. And now what they want to do is to completely extinguish any dissenting voices by bringing in as many individuals who are on the state's dole as possible. So once again, the California Reparations Task Force recently claimed that the state's Black residents whose ancestors were in the United States, not California, by the way, but in the United States, which is why so many individuals are going to move to California if this indeed happens. As long as you were here between 1933 and 1977, you're owed over $500 billion in reparations. Why 1933 to 1977? I have no idea. Self-proclaimed grassroots hip-hop organizer Dion Jenkins, who recommended close to $1 million in housing reparations on Wednesday, said in a recent interview, either they're going to comply or it's going to be a serious backlash. In other words, he is threatening that if you don't give me my $1 million in reparations, then there's going to be a backlash. This is what Democrats have created in California. They've created this environment that is actually dangerous because you're saying to people, you are entitled to this bundle of money. And then they get it in these individuals are getting it into their heads that, yes, I am entitled to this bundle of money, regardless of any facts whatsoever, regardless of the current opportunities that they have or the opportunities that they have let pass them by. Now they're entitled, and now they're going to start potentially, hurting people because they don't get this? That's dangerous. The Blaze previously reported that the 9-member reparations task force formed via legislation by Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom blamed the wealth gap in the state on redlining and racist housing covenants that segregated Black California residents in the 50s and 60s. Black households have a median wealth of $24,000, whereas white households have a median wealth of $188,200. So now this is where they're going with this. They're saying that you had to live in the U.S. from 33 to 77 during the period of housing discrimination, and that's where they're going with this. They're not even talking about slavery. So I'm sure the next thing that'll come, Chris, is that they'll say, well, now first it's housing discrimination, then it's food discrimination, and then it's going to be slavery. Then we're gonna have all these different kinds of reparation task forces, all to be able to buy votes and to divide the American people in the 21st century when no one cares about how you look. The Blaze reported this. Black households have a median wealth of $24,000, whereas white households have a median wealth of $188,200 in California. The task force determined that Black California residents are owed $569 billion, or $223,200 each. I like that, Chris. Incredible. So, Task Force Chairman Kamala Moore indicated that this figure has not yet been firmed up, reported the Washington Times. But on Wednesday, the task force held the first part of a 2-day meeting in Oakland City Hall to discuss payout parameters and to decide how the taxpayer money will be distributed to the descendants of those subjected to housing discriminations in the 21st century. So, as you can see, there is a reparation task force in California. They're going to be drawing lots of new citizens in California looking for their $223,000 check. And no sooner will that check come in than those individuals will be coming back, I have no doubt, and asking for even more money because the initial batch didn't cover what they really thought it would cover. So get ready. We're going to continue to report on this. And as we do, I'm sure we're going to find out how the Democrat Party is continuing to, in their own way, in my opinion, enslave the Black community by making so many in the Black community believe that the only way forward is to get this kind of payoff. And that is the most unfair part about the system, because a truly aspirational politician would tell you about all the opportunities that are right in front of you. Because why is it, ladies and gentlemen, so many immigrants come to the United States and they become entrepreneurs, or they become successful employees, or they become teachers or doctors or lawyers, whatever. They become really successful. This country and all of the fruits of this country are available to all American citizens who really want to put forth their best foot and try to make a better life for themselves. And that does not involve handouts. And it just shows you how out of control government has gotten. And that's the last word for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining me. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, Twitter 2.0, YouTube, Facebook, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.